Hello, Internet, and thank you very much for tuning in to the Cloud Native FM podcast. From building pipeline after pipeline to juggling data quality, CI/CD, and model deployment, one question keeps surfacing: what comes next? As business mature in data engineering and machine learning practices, they find themselves hitting a wall not in the ideas or data volume, but in operational discipline. Welcome to the world of data ops, where development speed meets data trust and automation meets accountability. This episode is about understanding why data ops matter and matters now more than ever, and how teams can begin adopting a practical, scalable, and open source first mindset to modern data delivery. So I have a wonderful guest with me today. And before I actually go towards him, we actually hosted a same workshop on that topic on his Continuous Delivery Foundation YouTube channel. That's available on the YouTube link as well. But before any further delay, let's straight go to my guest, Lisa Cow, for the first appearance on the Cloud Native FM podcast. Lisa, can you give us a quick intro of yourself?
Hi, and thank you for this wonderful introduction. This is a really exciting topic, and I'm so happy to be here. So, my name is Lisa Cow. I am a product manager at a organization called Datastrato, and we are the open source maintainers and creators of a project called Apache Gravitino, which is like a metadata lake slash meta store, which is really relevant to some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about today. Some of the other things that I'm known for are running the Continuous Delivery Foundation's DataOps Initiative. So, we're going to be going into that a little bit, as well as the Open Platform for Enterprise AI's Developer Experience Working Group.
Awesome. That's you are the perfect guest for me to ask some of the very critical questions of the time, because we live in a dangerous AI world where things actually been in a very precarious situation if it doesn't care about the authenticity in a very critical manner. And also, I think this quote I'm actually been quoting for a very long time: the moment your data pipeline hits production, you are no longer just an engineer, but you are running a data product. So that is vital in this in age of this area. But Lisa, tell us what inspired your journey into this data ops field, and also why you think it's now critically important.
Yeah, well, so like what you said before, I think when we initially got into the data science world and we wanted to run all of these experiments, we really wanted to think about, how can we get the most performance out of our models? And then we realized, wow, the barrier to that is the fact that our data is not high quality enough. How do we get our data to be high quality enough? Well, therefore came the birth of data engineering. We started building these end-to-end point-to-point pipelines, and they were very linear, right? We had our ETL or, ELT processes that kind of went in this straight pipeline. But the truth is that that became very unmaintainable once you started scaling from all of these different sources, from all of these different ways that, we work with data. And we lost a lot of observability in that as well. So then what happened? Well, we had the data platform revolution. All of a sudden, we were no longer just data engineers, but we were data platform engineers. And once you started introducing platform engineering into the mix, all of a sudden we had to think about services and, internal development and, creating things that could be self-serve. And that added so much more complexity in terms of how we ensured that high quality data was available at all times for self-serve analytics. And that's where we are today.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this is very critical debates, because I think there's a two buzzword actually been colliding with each other some of the time, and also been actually smoothing their transitioning into the production environment as in a very steady way. One is platform engineering and then generative AI. And we actually been platform has been a very big word these days as well. But I think like when you started up a new terminology, the new coins in the industry, I found to be a really challenging myself. I work in the developer relations space. This is a very new umbrella term. So for my job is to tell people what the hell I'm doing in the developer relations space. So the first question is the same. Yes, we have been using ops in all of the different places like DevOps, MLOps is now been in a horizon. There's a new terminology called front ops is also been winding up quite lately. But tell us, how do you define data ops in contrast to DevOps or MLOps?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because I think that the terminology is not standardized, kind of like you mentioned. And there's so many different spin-offs. Oh my God, spin-offs of ops, where it's like data DevSecOps and FinOps and just so many things. And really, the way that I personally see data ops is an umbrella term, right? I think that we really have defined MLOps to be really specific in terms of, feature engineering, model serving, really, monitoring drift and things like that. But we don't really have the same terminology to capture some of the stuff that goes into the data source management, the data lake management, and all of these different things that you might have in those processes. So the way that I think about data ops is really the data pipeline side of things. Now, is it arguable that maybe MLOps is a subset of something like DataOps? Sure, right? But I think what's useful for us to think about is creating a field around the practice of data engineering and the operation side of things that come around that. Because I think a lot of that work was under the idea of data engineering, but really data engineers are quite concerned with just serving high quality data and making sure their pipelines are working. They're not necessarily thinking about the underlying currents that maybe we think about traditionally in ops. So that's sort of what that term means to me.
Absolutely. And I think as we're moving into the journey of the data scientist world, we work with the application delivery and the infrastructure team a lot. Now there's a new team we need to take into the consideration that is a data engineering AI or data scientist team. And they have their
Mhm.
own requirement for building up the pipeline. And there is some confusion around that because when I ask a data engineer, oh, are you production ready? They say, yes, we are production ready. Give me a machine of 360 trillion byte of CPU and RAM. And we said, this is not we meant to be in the production ready. We're just talking about, is this stuff is going to be run in the where we actually already been running the stuff around that. That's we meant to be a production ready stuff in there. So that's absolutely right. Like what we need to build around this pipeline that is a universal we have been using around that, and we can build construct and terminology around that to actually enhance the capabilities we're actually introducing into the pipeline as well. But considering like right now you work in some of the companies, also you work in the open source umbrella, and you have a very wonderful experience from the different domains around that as well. Can you tell us how do you think like in a data scientist world we need to purify the data, evaluate and test, and there is so much sophisticated steps need to be evolved in going forward with these terminologies, data ops, which one of the which one of the cases or which one of the domains you are hitting most?
Yeah, really, I think access is the huge issue. So when we think about traditional data science work, we think, okay, we have some sort of data frame that we're loading into Pandas, or we have some sort of clean feature data set. But really, the nature of the data that we're working with right now is extremely multimodal. There's a lot of different formats. There's many different destinations and sources, right? So let's take something like a data lake. A data lake might have, JSON data, semi-structured data. It might have a lot of different files. You might be running like Hadoop in there. You might also have a lot of different relational stores, object stores, all sorts of different crap in there. And really, how do you serve that data in a way that makes sense or is easily accessible for analytics teams or, even in this case, maybe, LLMs or agents, right? And part of that is around the access control. Part of that is around the metadata management. and really consolidating a lot of these different heterogeneous sources together. I think that's probably the biggest one. And that's why we're seeing right now, at least in the data engineering space, this huge revolution around open table formats. You have data in like an S3 bucket, you have it maybe on-prem, and this is even just in the relational space. We haven't even really explored the true capability of like an open format, in my opinion. But take something like Apache Iceberg, what does it do? It really creates a common layer between all of these different object stores and relational stores so that your query engines know what to expect, right? And if you can serve it to a query engine, if you can control the access and enable, whatever controls or governance that you need there, then you have a bit of a safety net and a way to serve all of that data to then your upstream, right? Which is really important at the end of the day. So I think that's really the big thing, is just figuring out we know how to get everything into one place. And unfortunately, that place is really messy. So we need to figure out what is the high quality data in that data lake, what is the low quality data, what data is relevant to our use cases, and how do we manage the access of it? Because that's a really expensive place right now in the stack.
Yes, absolutely. And I think right now, if you look at it, there's a one computational issue is a giant one in the AI world. And also there's a distribution of the AI as well. I see some solutions and some open source product being popping up that actually will make sure that you have a standardization for AI and ML packaging and versioning system. And that's how you can concatenate data within your pipeline. And also, when we live in a world where I think policy, governance, and automation is hugely important, especially when you actually model training your data. And everybody is now living in a world where there's, oh, yes, we can actually build our own model. Yes, you can. But who do you tell you which data you doesn't need to incorporate into the modeling or training part of it? Nobody actually been thinking around that, and luckily some people actually chiming into thing and telling them, no, you can do it, but there should be authenticity, and authorization is a very important subject into this domain as well. But also, I think I know from your background, you work on the company that has actually been a building some open source tool. And now it's a very important because we both live in the open source world a lot. And tell us about Gravitino, what it is, does, and which domains it's fall in, and how long it's been actually been exist in the open source umbrella.
Yeah. So Apache Gravitino is a project that was created by Jerry Shao, who's currently our CTO here at Datastrato. And really what it is a meta store. And so let's say that you have a data catalog, and I think many people are familiar with a lot of the different catalogs that are out there right now. But for those of you who don't know, it's a way to manage metadata, right? So you don't necessarily want to always be working directly with the data. Sometimes the metadata is a little bit more informative for your use case. And so really that's where we store, the provenance of the data, who owns it. We store the access control. We store tagging. We are able to label the quality of that data, what the data actually contains. And this is really important because those open table formats that I mentioned before leverage metadata systems to actually make our table scanning much more efficient, right? So this is a really big part of optimization. What we do is a catalog of catalogs model where you might have a relational store like Postgres that uses something like a JDBC catalog, so a Java database catalog, or some sort of Hive meta store catalog as well, or maybe an Iceberg catalog, a Kafka, schema registry or topic registry, and then maybe even a model registry as well. So all of that leads to all of these different paths within your stack, all of these different sources where you're containing really important information because they're all being used in your data pipeline in some sort of way. But really the democratization of how you figure out the access across all those systems, it might be IM for some, it might be some other, specialized access management way. You don't really know how to perform governance on all of it. And so that's why when you have a meta store that can take and register all those catalogs together, you're able to enforce the policies in that specific layer so that then when you have some sort of query engine or you're trying to access it, whether it's like an LLM or an agent, they can go through that guardrail and then not have to touch any of the things underneath it, but you still are able to take advantage of, really consolidating your entire system.
Awesome, wonderfully. So I can imagine this in a similar to the where I live in the world of the infrastructure, where you have some clusters stood up and you have a gatekeeping mechanism in front of you. Let's say if I doesn't want to tell, if some of my team member don't have right access to some of the cluster, they doesn't do anything in the cluster, but they can view the cluster information. Same as we're doing with the Gravitino and the methodology for the data set. You have some, everybody can query some sort of the data, but there should be a gatekeeping into what should be touched, what should be right, what should be view from the data perspective. If that's true, I love that kind of methodology because that is really a missing piece. And some teams need to be re-engineering and re-engineering and re-engineering all the time just to have that layer being actually have authenticity on that layer as well. So I think that's a wonderful information to have. Just to touch upon, now people who actually listen to us, they might be really interested to learn more about the Gravitino. So can you suggest some of the sources so I can actually include in the description and tell people where to actually learn more about the project?
I definitely think the README is a great place to start. As with any open source project, we have a really thriving community. We also did a zero point 0.8 release recently and a zero point 0.9 release. So I would check those release notes. There's also a YouTube video that I'll link that includes me going over some of those features. And really, we're also going to be releasing our Helm chart deployment. And I think that it works really well with the Kubernetes system, specifically because as we're deploying so many of these AI applications on Kubernetes, on stateful workloads, Kubernetes is known for having a really strong control plane that is really customizable. But generally speaking, as well, we want to be able to have that same plane and those same controls that apply to our entire data source system. And that's kind of where I think Gravitino and Kubernetes really can go hand in hand in terms of being cloud native and supporting that ecosystem. So would highly recommend going just straight to the repo, knowing your audience. They probably want to go into the code, fully open source. There's lots of activity, lots of issues, lots of pull requests. And so it's a very healthy community.
Awesome. I don't know about the other, like, but I will be spending more time on the Gravity, that's for sure, because I'm actually struggling to find those kind of solutions for some of the team I happen to work with. Just we are going back into the data ops side as well, because I think currently is agentic AI, where you actually been offloading some of the capabilities to some third party, and then they perform information, and then you get the result back. Now, some companies are really interested and they see a huge benefit to this automation approach out there. Some are skeptical, some rare corporate sector are worried. Now, how this thing actually been preventive, how this thing actually been work in a very safe and secure way. There are some solution, but there's a skill shortage always been in there as well. So we have some landscapes all over the place. Like in the CNCF, we have a continuously cloud native computing foundation landscape where you have some different ladder observability. They have their own tooling. Then the storage, they have own tooling, orchestration, containers. So it's a huge, giant landscape available for the enterprise and the some company. They're also OpenSSF. They build down their own landscape. We work in the continuous delivery foundation. They have their own DevOps landscape as well. So do you think in the near future, or is it a pushing forward to build around a data ops and some technologies underneath that landscape? So people just need to understand, yes, this is the data ops as a methodology, and there are the framework. And I need to implement this framework. There's a landscape around that. So is it happening sooner than expected? What is the progress been look like as of today?
So my opinion on this is that we're going to be really heavily punished in the next 5 years for adopting things that are unsafe today. One of the biggest innovations that we're seeing in this space right now, specifically when it comes to, serving context to agents and LLMs, is the MCP. So the Model Context Protocol. This is a protocol that was released by Anthropic. Everybody's talking about it and everybody's releasing their own MCP client. But if you look a little bit more closely to MCP, and I think MCP is an amazing technology, but you can tell that it was made by machine learning engineers because it's not really secure, right? It doesn't really have scalability or enterprise use case in mind. There's a lot of third-party calls that are created within it. It's very hard hard to, I can imagine, having hundreds of MCP servers and just being, completely overwhelmed and having security leaks everywhere and it not being maintainable or scalable in that way, especially if it's a point-to-point system. And so really, this is the perfect time, I think, and kind of call to action for the DevOps and the cloud native folks to insert themselves in this situation because it's just a service mesh, but it's a service mesh created by machine learning engineers. And if that sounds like a bad idea, that's because it kind of is, right? Like there's a lot of networking components here, and there's a lot of access and control plane issues here that are not necessarily being addressed. And so one of the things that we have to do in our communities is really enter ourselves into these conversations and go, I know that you really like MCP because it's enabling performance and context within all of these really cool frameworks that you're using for AI. But let's take a step back and let's actually assess this tool and figure out a way to actually make it production ready and make it enterprise ready, make it secure, make it maintainable, make it long lasting like we do with all of our other technologies in the same vein, right? And the unfortunate thing is that we have to insert ourselves into this conversation. This conversation won't come to us. Unfortunately, I think if that was going to be the case, it would have already happened. So I think that's a really great example of sort of where these worlds need to meet.
Yes, absolutely. I think you hit a wonderful point on that as well, because I think with every evolution, like with the Linux from the cloud native, from the Kubernetes, you first come up with the open source project, and then there's a huge proliferation of the tooling. And then you build around some framework and some concepts and terminologies, and then you build around standards. That easy for a lot of the infrastructure and application developer. For the data scientist, it's not that easy the case. You can build around those service mesh capabilities or some sidecar methodologies for the AI driven development. But the problem is that you're living in a data world. That is a scary world. You doesn't have the leverage to do stuff that application developer and the DevOps engineer can do. So you are limited to what you're supposed to do. So that's where you absolutely hit a wonderful phrase. Yes, these framework actually been establishing, but there's not even a standardization approach to make sure those are guardrailed and safeguarded to be implemented in the enterprise and corporate setting. That is not the case. And sometimes engineers forget about those things because they need innovation in the first place. But the business need a trust in the first place. If it doesn't hit the trust, and then the business doesn't actually adopt or attack to your innovation, so that is a problem. So I love to see some within the foundation, some people actually come up with those really corner cases, and they talk about even from the data ops perspective, on the MLOps and DevOps perspective, and unite the conversation in a way that the business criteria should be fulfilled with whatever the innovation happening all the time as well. So I think that is really the important case here. But Lisa, before I let you go, tell us a little bit about the CdFoundation in itself and what is actually been you doing in the data ops framework. And if as somebody were listening to us and they actually just introduced to the data ops terminology and they wanted to learn more, and we actually been doing some great work in the CdFoundation, to tell us a little bit about the some of the initiative you have been leading within the CdFoundation.
For sure. For those of you who are unaware, so the Continuous Delivery Foundation is sort of the DevOps foundation that's within the, LF branch. So if you're interested in sort of learning about things like, Jenkins or Ortelius, previously one of our projects was Argo CD before it ran off to CNCF. But there's a lot of really great work around data DevSecOps and SecOps in general, and sort of how do you create maintainable SBOMs, or how do you productionize, how do you, really streamline your CI/CD. So these are really relevant conversations that we had within the CDF in general. And so when we're also looking a little bit within the data side of things, we notice that a lot of these practices are missing. And one of the reasons why is because the, DevOps teams don't necessarily get chances to talk to the data engineering teams or the MLOps teams, right? Sometimes they work a little bit siloed. And so we wanted to create this common learning sector where we can go, okay, This is kind of what we're building on the data engineering side. It's going to look a lot like the declarative programming, and it's because it is declarative programming. And the reason why it's declarative programming is because we came to this conclusion ourselves that configurability is really great, but we didn't know that the tools that you had already existed. So we created something from the ground up, and maybe it's not the best solution. And I wanted to create a platform where then DevOps engineers could chime in and go like, okay, let me show you how to properly do this instead. And that's where you get, Terraform being used for data pipelines. We are able to have, better and safer Kubernetes deployments for your, data applications. So these can be things like Apache Unicorn, but also just like how to run Spark jobs in Kubernetes in a way that actually works well, right? And so we're noticing that as data engineering scales, because it is now, like we said before, data platform engineering, we're seeing a lot of the people come to the same conclusion, but in different ways. But a lot of that work is being a little bit redundant, right? And we want to make sure that as data engineers, at least, we're able to offload the work that we need to do to the teams that are, really maintaining the internal developer platforms. And the way that we do that is through teaching them what we're doing and what those sort of tools look like.
Absolutely. And I think the same conversation, because I try to relate with my domain as well, because there's a huge, we created an ecosystem of the landscape, and then the developer are overwhelmed with the amount of the tooling we have introduced in their table. So now we're offloading all these tools. So we are actually adding abstraction for the developers so they can work around that. But the problem is that abstraction only works when you have some standard built into it. Otherwise, everybody has their own abstraction, end up everybody using the same logic and same capabilities twice. One in the abstraction layer and one they actually been building around that as well. So as I'm actually mentioned with it, I think now people building pipeline after pipeline. So pipeline is it's proliferation. One for the application delivery pipeline. One is for the data scientist pipeline. One is for the data engineer. One is for the machine learning pipeline. It's good. You're doing the good job in your own domain, but it's a amount the traveling the data need to take into the consideration is a very tension maybe, because some pipeline doesn't need to have access to this data, and some pipeline need to have more access to data. So that's a problem. So I love the work that somebody put up these conversation around data ops, so that can deliver the strong message to the community that we need some standardization, governance, and automation, and plus skill set that is really important for the modern ages as well. But thank you very much, Lisa. We first met on the Continuous Delivery Foundation workshop. I really inspired the knowledge you have on this domain as well. So I'm looking forward to actually inviting you more on this podcast style conversation to educate us around what's happening in the ecosystem as well. Before I let you go, is there any stuff in the near future, because you have introduced us to the Gravitino, that I'm spending more time on it. So is there anything planned for the near future, so where people can need to focus on more, and how they can actually reach out to you or some of the conference you have been traveling and they talk to you about the open source solution your team is developing on?
Yeah, so I would say the best way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn, Lisa and Cow. If you just search that, you'll usually find me. And I'm always posting stuff and I'm always happy to chat with people on the subject. The DataOps Initiative also has a dedicated Slack channel on the CD Slack, so I would recommend that as well. But if you're going to be at Open Source Summit North America, we're actually going to be giving a talk on Apache Gravitino in the Cloud Native track. I'll also be doing some data ops like meetups there, and I think that's a great place for us to converge as a community and to have some chats around that sort of stuff too. We're also going to be releasing, like I said, a Helm chart for Gravitino as well. And so really a lot of the stuff that we talked about here is enabled through metadata and the meta store, things like federation, things like control planes, observability. Like this is all stuff that's the backbone, is really the catalog, and not a lot of people understand that. So we're definitely going to be releasing many more, different things around that in the future. We also recently did a optimizing iceberg tables workshop. So you can find that if you just search Datastrato on YouTube. But generally speaking, if you want to catch me, Open Source Summit North America, amazing conference, sort of this hodgepodge of all these different disciplines coming together. And come find me. We'll definitely be having some really great chats.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Lisa. I definitely stay in touch with you on the Gravitino project as well. I will pick up my brain how the project has been for solving some of the problem, and looking forward to meeting you again, because that's another subject we need to take into the consideration as well. So hope this conversation everyone finds helpful. And I think the call to action is, if you are a data engineer, ML lead, or even a platform team wondering what's next after pipeline, start looking at DataOps, not just as tech, but as a practice. Because in this new world, shipping fast isn't enough. Shipping with trust is the real differentiator. Thank you very much for joining us on this conversation. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye.